She had been thinking about it for some time now, not constantly, not with urgency or pressure, just a thought that returned occasionally, settling into her awareness the way familiar things do. A possibility, an intention, something she would do eventually when the time felt right. Ari sat at the observation window, her hands resting loosely in her lap. The stars drifted past slowly, their positions shifting in ways too gradual to notice unless she paid close attention. The ship carried her forward through the darkness, steady and unhurried, the way it always had. She had been inside the ship for a long time now, months, perhaps. The exact duration felt less important than the rhythm of it, the cycles of waking and sleeping, eating and moving, observing and resting. The ship had become familiar in the way a home becomes familiar. Not confining, just known. But there was an outside. There had always been an outside, and she had always known that one day she would go there. Not yet, but eventually. The thought did not create excitement or nervousness. It simply existed, calm and patient, waiting for the right moment to become action. She had prepared for this long ago, back on Earth during her training. She had learned the procedures, practiced the movements, understood the systems. The knowledge was there, quiet and ready, like a tool resting on a shelf until it was needed. She looked out at the stars. They were the same stars she had been watching for weeks now, familiar points of light scattered across the darkness, each one steady and constant. She had come to know some of them by their positions, by the patterns they formed, not names. She did not need names, just recognition, the awareness that this star was always here and that one was always there. Going outside would not change the stars. They would look the same, perhaps brighter without the viewport between her and them, perhaps sharper, but still the same stars, burning quietly in the same places they had always been. She thought about the difference between inside and outside. Here, in the ship, she was surrounded by air and warmth and light. Systems worked quietly in the walls and floors, maintaining pressure and temperature, cycling oxygen, filtering water. She did not think about them most of the time. They simply worked, dependable and constant. Outside was different, not hostile exactly, just different. A place where those things, air, warmth, pressure, did not exist naturally. A place humans had not evolved to be, but a place they had learned to visit carefully and thoughtfully through preparation and design. She had always appreciated that, the patience of it, the way humans had approached space, not with recklessness or bravado, but with care and attention. They had built systems. They had tested them. They had refined them over decades, over generations, until going outside became something routine, not easy exactly, but reliable, safe in the way that well-designed things are safe. Her breath moved in and out, slow and steady. She noticed it without trying to control it. The rhythm was familiar, automatic. The air moved through her lungs, exchanged oxygen for carbon dioxide, and was exhaled back into the ship's atmosphere, where it would be filtered and renewed and breathed again. She trusted that process. She did not think about it consciously, but the trust was there, quiet and foundational. The ship kept her alive. The systems worked, and when she went outside, other systems would do the same work, just in a different way, just closer to her body. The thought did not trouble her. It settled over her like a familiar blanket, comfortable and reassuring. She had always been good at trusting systems, not blindly, not without understanding. But once she understood how something worked, once she had seen it function reliably over time, trust came naturally, and she understood the systems that would keep her safe outside. She had studied them. She had watched them work. She knew they were dependable. Going outside was not about courage. It was not about overcoming fear or proving something to herself. It was simply a thing she would do because it was part of the journey she had chosen, part of what it meant to be here, in this ship, moving through space far from Earth. She thought about the word eventually. It felt right. Not soon, not rushed. But when the time came, when the cycle turned in such a way that it made sense to prepare, to check the systems, to move through the familiar routines, then she would go, and it would be fine. The stars continued their slow drift across the viewport. The ship hummed its constant, patient hum. Her hands rested in her lap, her body relaxed in the chair. There was no urgency, no countdown, no pressure to act before she was ready. She would go outside eventually, and until then she would be here, inside, watching the stars and breathing the recycled air and trusting the systems that held her safe. Eventually, the word felt like enough. She let her gaze soften, no longer focusing on individual stars, but taking in the field of them, the overall presence, light scattered across darkness, patient and enduring. She did not need to go outside to appreciate them. She did not need to prove anything. She just needed to sit here in this moment and let the thought of going outside exist without demanding immediate action. It could wait. Everything could wait. There was no rush. The ship carried her forward. The stars glowed softly in the distance, and she sat, breathing, thinking, letting the thought of outside settle into place alongside all the other thoughts that made up her days. Before going outside, there was this quiet space where preparation lived, this moment of simply being inside, aware of the outside, but not yet ready to bridge the distance between them. And that was fine. After a time she did not measure, she rose from the chair, slowly, carefully, and made her way back through the dim corridors toward the galley, where she could prepare something warm and grounding, a small ritual to anchor the cycle. Chapter 2. things that keep you alive. She had been thinking about air, not in a worried way, not with concern or anxiety, just noticing, paying attention to something so fundamental it usually went unnoticed. Ari stood in the corridor near one of the ventilation panels, her hand resting lightly on the wall beside it. The surface was cool and smooth beneath her palm. She could feel the faint vibration of the ship's systems working, a gentle hum that traveled through the walls, constant and reassuring. The air moved around her. She felt it against her skin, a subtle current that told her the circulation was working. Cool, clean, filtered. It flowed through the corridor in ways she could not see but could sense. A presence, a resource carefully maintained. She thought about how much air there was. Not infinite, certainly. The ship carried a limited supply, but the systems recycled it endlessly, scrubbing away carbon dioxide, replenishing oxygen, maintaining the balance that allowed her to breathe without thinking about breathing. It was remarkable in a quiet way. The precision of it, the constancy. Air cycled through filters and scrubbers and into her lungs and back out again, over and over, day after day, and she trusted it completely. That trust had not come immediately. Early in the journey, she had been more aware of it, more conscious of the fact that every breath depended on machines working correctly. But over time, as the systems proved themselves reliable, the awareness had faded into the background. The trust had deepened. Now she breathed without question, the way she had breathed on Earth, the way anyone breathed when air was simply there, dependable and free. But here, air was not free. It was maintained, sustained, kept at the right pressure, the right composition, the right temperature through careful engineering and constant vigilance. She moved her hand from the wall and continued down the corridor, her steps light in the low gravity. The air followed her, or perhaps she moved through it. The distinction did not matter. What mattered was that it was there. She passed another ventilation panel and paused, listening. The soft hiss of air moving, the gentle whir of fans turning. Sounds so familiar now that they had become part of the ship's voice, part of the constant background that told her everything was working as it should. Temperature, too. She noticed it now in a way she usually did not. The corridor was comfortable, not too warm, not too cool, just right. The ship regulated temperature automatically, adjusting heating and cooling to maintain an environment that felt natural, even though nothing about this place was natural in the way Earth had been natural. On Earth, temperature had been governed by the sun, by weather patterns, by the planet's atmosphere. Here, it was governed by systems, by sensors that measured and adjusted, by heaters and coolers that responded to the ship's needs. And it worked, quietly, constantly, without her needing to intervene. She thought about pressure. That was harder to notice. Pressure did not announce itself the way temperature did, or the way moving air did. It simply was. A force pressing gently on her body from all directions, holding her together in ways she could not feel but would certainly notice if it changed. The ship maintained pressure at a level that felt normal to her body, not the exact pressure of Earth's surface, that would have been inefficient, but close enough that her body did not notice the difference, close enough that she could move and breathe and exist without strain. Outside, there was no pressure, or rather, there was pressure so low it might as well be nothing, a vacuum, a place where her body could not maintain its form without help, where blood would boil and lungs would fail and consciousness would fade within seconds. But she did not think about that with fear. She thought about it as a fact, a condition of the environment, something humans had learned to account for through preparation and design. The ship kept pressure inside. The suit would keep pressure around her body when she went outside. Both were systems. Both were reliable. Both had been tested and refined and proven over decades of use. She trusted them. Trust was not the absence of understanding. It was the result of understanding. She knew how the systems worked. She had studied them during training. She had watched them function day after day since leaving Earth. And that knowledge, that experience, created trust. The air continued to move through the corridor. The temperature held steady. The pressure remained constant, invisible, and essential. She made her way to the small recreation area and sat on the bench, her hands resting on her knees. The ship hummed around her. The systems worked, and she breathed and felt the air move through her lungs and trusted that it would continue. Survival in space was not heroic. It was not about endurance or willpower or courage. It was about engineering, about systems designed carefully and maintained diligently, about redundancy and monitoring and quiet competence. She appreciated that, the honesty of it, the way survival here depended not on individual strength, but on collective knowledge, on the work of countless people who had designed these systems, tested them, refined them, made them reliable enough that she could sit here breathing recycled air and feel completely safe. Going outside would be the same, not heroic, not a test of courage, just a matter of carrying those systems with her. Air in tanks, pressure in the suit, temperature regulated by layers and heaters. All the things the ship provided, made portable and personal. She would carry a small environment with her, a bubble of safety, and she would trust it the way she trusted the ship, because trust was not blind faith. Trust was knowledge tested by experience, and she had both. The air moved softly through the recreation area. The temperature held. The pressure remained steady, invisible, and dependable. And she sat, breathing, thinking about the things that kept her alive, not with worry or fear, but with quiet appreciation, with gratitude for the care and precision that made survival in space something routine, something reliable, something she could trust completely. After a while, she rose and made her way through the corridors toward her quarters, where she could rest before the cycle turned again. Chapter 3. The Suit is a World. She had been looking at the suit for some time. It hung in the equipment bay, suspended from its storage mount, empty and waiting. White fabric with reinforced joints, clear helmet, gloves attached at the wrists, boots secured at the ankles, everything connected, everything sealed, everything designed to work as a single integrated system. Ari stood before it, her hands at her sides, her gaze moving slowly over the suit's surface. She had seen it before, of course, many times, but today she was really looking, really noticing. It was smaller than she had expected when she first saw it during training, not bulky or imposing, just carefully shaped, efficient, every component serving a purpose, nothing wasted. She reached out and touched the outer layer. The fabric was smooth and slightly cool beneath her fingers. Tough, designed to withstand micrometeorites, temperature extremes, the wear of movement. But it did not feel rigid. There was a slight give to it, a flexibility that allowed motion while maintaining protection. Layers, she knew. The suit was made of many layers, each one serving a different function. The outer layer for protection, inner layers for insulation, a bladder layer to hold pressure, cooling tubes woven through the fabric to regulate temperature, and finally, the innermost layer, soft against skin, the boundary between body and system. She thought about that, the way the suit held all those functions in such a small space. It was like the ship, but compressed, miniaturized, made personal. The ship provided air, temperature, pressure across corridors and compartments. The suit provided the same things, but only for the space immediately around her body. A personal atmosphere, a bubble of earth carried on her back and wrapped around her limbs. She let her hand drop and took a step back, taking in the whole suit. It looked almost human hanging there, the shape of arms and legs and torso, but hollow, waiting to be filled, waiting to become, temporarily, a very small world. That was what it was, she thought. A world, not in the grand sense, not planets and stars and vast distances, but in the fundamental sense. A place where life could exist, where the conditions necessary for survival were maintained carefully and continuously. She moved closer again and ran her fingers along one of the arms, feeling the joints. They bent smoothly, designed to move with her body rather than against it. The suit would not fight her. It would follow her movements, translate her intentions into action, allow her to be herself even while wrapped in layers of protection. The helmet caught her attention. Clear faceplate, gold-tinted visor that could be lowered to protect against the sun's glare. Communication equipment built into the sides. A small light mounted on top. Everything she would need to see and be seen and speak and hear. She thought about putting it on. Not now. There was no need now. But eventually, the process would be methodical, step by step, each component checked and sealed and confirmed. Nothing rushed, nothing assumed. First, the inner layer, soft fabric worn against the skin, with cooling tubes running through it to carry heat away from her body. Then the suit itself, pulled on carefully, arms through sleeves, legs through legs, torso settled into place. Gloves would come next, locked into place at the wrists, sealed and tested. Then boots, then the helmet lowered over her head and locked to the neck ring, and finally the checks, pressure tested, systems verified, communication confirmed. The entire process would take time. That was intentional. Time allowed for care, for attention, for noticing if something was not quite right. She had practiced it during training, over and over, until the movements became familiar, until her hands knew where to reach and her body knew how to adjust. Muscle memory built through repetition so that when the time came, the process would feel natural rather than foreign. The suit was not uncomfortable. That had surprised her during training. She had expected it to feel confining, restrictive, but it had not. Once properly fitted and adjusted, it had felt almost like clothing. Heavy, yes, constrained in some ways, but not oppressive, not something to endure. It was something to trust, something that would hold her safe while she moved through an environment her body was not made for. She thought about the air tanks mounted on the suit's back. They would provide oxygen for hours, not indefinitely. Nothing worked indefinitely, but long enough, more than long enough for what she would need to do. And if something went wrong, if a seal failed or a system malfunctioned, there were backups. Redundancy built into every critical system. A second air supply, a secondary cooling loop, emergency procedures practiced until they became automatic, safety layered quietly, one system supporting another, nothing left to chance. She stepped back again, her eyes moving over the suit one more time. It hung there, patient and ready, not calling to her, not demanding use, just waiting, a tool, an environment, a world she could put on and carry with her. When I wear this, I carry everything I need. The thought settled gently, true and simple. The suit would be her ship, her atmosphere, her protection. Everything the larger vessel provided made small enough to wear, and she would trust it because it was designed to be trusted, because it had been tested and proven and refined through decades of use by people who had gone outside before her. She would not be the first to wear a suit like this. She would not be pioneering anything. She would simply be continuing a practice that had become, over time, routine, reliable, safe. That was comforting. The idea that she was part of a long line of people who had done this same thing, who had put on suits and gone outside and come back, who had trusted the systems and found that trust rewarded. She let her breath move in and out, slow and steady. The suit hung before her, empty and waiting, and she stood, looking, learning, letting her understanding deepen. The suit was a world, small, personal, carefully designed, and when the time came, she would put it on, seal herself inside, and carry that world with her into the quiet darkness beyond the ship's hull. After a time, she turned and made her way back through the corridors toward the galley, where she could prepare something warm, a small ritual to mark the turning of the cycle. Chapter 4: Practicing Without Risk. She had been moving through the motions for the past hour, not quickly, not with any sense of urgency, just steadily, methodically, repeating movements she had practiced many times before. Ari stood in the equipment bay, the suit still hanging on its mount behind her. She did not need the suit for this. Not yet. This was just practice, rehearsal, the quiet work of making unfamiliar things familiar. She reached forward with both hands, her movement slow and deliberate. Her fingers found an imagined clasp, turned it, pulled it back. The motion was smooth, practiced. Her hands knew what to do, even though there was nothing actually there to manipulate. Muscle memory. That was what they had called it during training. The way the body learned through repetition. The way movements became automatic, embedded in the nervous system so deeply that they no longer required conscious thought. She had always found that comforting. The idea that practice could make difficult things easy. That repetition could transform uncertainty into confidence. She moved through the next sequence, hands to the sides, checking imagined seals, fingers running along connection points, eyes looking for indicators that did not yet exist in this empty rehearsal. But her body moved as though they did, as though the suit were already on, the systems already active, the checks already necessary. This was how preparation worked, not through sudden readiness, but through gradual accumulation. Each practice session added a little more certainty. Each repetition smoothed away a little more hesitation, until the movements felt natural, until the process felt like something she had always known how to do. She paused and reset, began again from the beginning. Hands to the helmet, lifting it carefully, though there was no helmet to lift, lowering it over her head, though her head remained bare, locking it into place, though there was no lock to engage. But her hands knew the motion, her arms knew the angle, her body knew how to adjust its position to make the movements easier. During training, they had emphasized this, the importance of practicing without the actual equipment, of building the movement patterns in a safe environment where mistakes had no consequences, where she could pause, reset, try again without pressure or risk. And it had worked. By the time she had actually worn the suit during training, the movements had already been familiar. The weight had been new, yes. The constraints had required adjustment. But the fundamental actions, the reaching, the turning, the checking, had already been learned. She appreciated that approach, the patience of it, the recognition that readiness came through repetition, not through sudden inspiration or forced courage. She moved through the sequence again, and again, each time a little smoother, each time requiring a little less conscious attention, the movements becoming part of her, woven into the fabric of things her body knew how to do. There was no rush, no deadline pressing her forward. She could practice like this for as long as she wanted, days, weeks, until the movements felt so natural that she could perform them in her sleep. That was the point, really, to make the unfamiliar so familiar that it ceased to be remarkable, to transform the extraordinary into the routine. She thought about pilots, the way they practiced emergency procedures over and over in simulators. Not because emergencies were likely, but because if one ever happened, they needed to be able to respond without thinking, without hesitation, with movements that had been practiced so thoroughly they became automatic. The same principle applied here. She was not practicing because she expected problems. She was practicing so that if problems ever arose, her body would know what to do before her mind had fully registered what was happening. But mostly, she was practicing so that nothing would feel surprising, so that when the time came to actually put on the suit and go outside, the process would feel like something she had done 100 times before, because she would have, just not with the actual equipment. She moved through the motions again, slower this time, paying attention to each detail, making sure her hands moved precisely, her body adjusted correctly, her awareness stayed focused. Practice was not about speed. It was about precision, about building patterns that would remain reliable under any circumstance. She paused and let her arms drop to her sides. Her breathing was steady, unhurried. The equipment bay was quiet around her. The suit hung on its mount, observing silently. She had always liked practicing. Even as a child, she had enjoyed the process of learning through repetition. The way uncertain attempts gradually became confident actions. The satisfaction of feeling her body master something it had not known how to do before. That satisfaction was here now, quiet but present. Each practice session added to her readiness. Each repetition built trust, not just in the equipment, but in herself, in her ability to use it correctly, to remember the sequences, to respond appropriately. Going outside would require many small actions performed correctly, checking seals, monitoring systems, adjusting position, managing movement. None of them individually difficult, but all of them important, all of them needing to be reliable. And so she practiced, not because she doubted herself, but because she respected the environment she would be entering, because she understood that space was unforgiving of carelessness, but entirely safe for those who approached it with care and preparation. She reset and began the sequence again, hands reaching, body adjusting, movements flowing one into the next, smooth and unhurried. There was a rhythm to it, a meditation. The repetition became soothing after a while, the familiar motions creating a space where thought could settle and awareness could deepen. She was not worried about going outside, but she was thorough, methodical, patient with the process of becoming ready, and that patience was its own kind of confidence. The knowledge that readiness would come not through force or haste, but through care and repetition, through the quiet accumulation of practiced motions and deepened understanding. She completed the sequence once more and let her hands drop. Her breath moved in and out, calm and steady. The practice was done for now, but she would return to it, tomorrow perhaps, or the next cycle, as many times as needed until the movements felt as natural as walking, until going outside felt like something she had always known how to do. After a while, she made her way through the corridors toward the observation deck, where she could sit quietly and let her body rest while her mind settled. Chapter 5: Trusting Systems. She had been reviewing the ship's diagnostics for some time, not because anything was wrong. Nothing was wrong. The systems reported normal function across every category. Green indicators glowed softly on the screen, steady and reassuring. Everything worked the way it was designed to work, but she reviewed them anyway, because that was part of preparation, part of understanding, part of building the quiet certainty that would carry her when she went outside. Ari sat at the navigation console, her hand resting lightly on the edge. The screen showed layers of information: life support, propulsion, communication, power distribution. Each system monitored by sensors, each status confirmed and logged. The ship watching itself, constantly and patiently reporting its own health. She had always found that comforting. The idea that systems could monitor systems, that nothing relied on a single point of awareness, that if something did go wrong, and it rarely did, multiple layers of detection would notice before it became serious. Redundancy. That was the word engineers used. Building backups into every critical function, not because failure was expected, but because reliability came from preparation, not from hope. The life support systems had redundancy: 2 independent air recyclers, backup oxygen reserves, secondary filtration systems. If one failed, another stood ready. The ship would not allow her to run out of air because of a single malfunction. The same principle applied to power. Multiple generation systems, battery reserves, solar panels ready to deploy if needed, energy flowing through the ship along parallel pathways so that no single failure could darken everything at once. And temperature control? heating elements distributed throughout the ship, cooling loops running through separate channels, sensors placed redundantly, checking and cross-checking, ensuring that if one reported incorrectly, others would notice the discrepancy. She thought about trust, how it was built not just through function, but through design, through the careful anticipation of what might go wrong and the patient construction of fallbacks and alternatives. The ship had been designed by people who understood that space was unforgiving, that mistakes here had consequences, that reliability mattered more than efficiency or elegance. And so they had built systems that watched themselves, that backed themselves up, that could fail partially without failing completely. That was what she trusted, not perfection. Nothing was perfect, but resilience, the ability to continue working even when something went wrong. She scrolled through another screen. Communication systems, multiple antennas, multiple frequencies, multiple protocols, ways to send and receive information that did not depend on any single component working flawlessly. Going outside, she would carry that same redundancy with her. The suit had 2 oxygen supplies, 2 cooling loops, 2 layers of pressure bladder, 2 ways to communicate. Everything critical was doubled so that a single failure would create inconvenience but not danger. I trust what's been tested. The thought surfaced quietly, simply, true in a way that felt foundational. She trusted these systems not because she had blind faith in technology, but because she understood how they had been proven. Through testing, through use, through the accumulated experience of everyone who had gone outside before her. Humans had been doing this for decades, wearing suits, leaving ships, moving through vacuum, and the systems had evolved through that experience. Early suits had been crude, risky, but each generation had learned from the previous one, had identified weaknesses and addressed them, had added redundancy where single points of failure had been discovered. The suit she would wear was the result of that evolution. Not perfect, nothing ever would be, but reliable, tested extensively, proven through thousands of hours of use by hundreds of people who had gone outside and returned safely. She appreciated that lineage, the way her safety was built on the experience of others, on the lessons they had learned and the improvements they had made. She was not pioneering. She was following a well-established path, using tools that had been refined carefully over time. The console chimed softly, a routine notification, a scheduled systems check completing. She glanced at the results, all nominal, everything working as it should. She thought about the difference between trusting something and understanding it. They were related, but not identical. Understanding helped build trust. But trust also required experience, seeing systems work repeatedly, watching them handle problems, observing their reliability over time. She had that experience with the ship, months of watching the systems function without interruption, air cycling, temperature holding, pressure remaining steady, the quiet competence of well-designed machines doing what they were built to do. The suit would be the same. She would watch its systems before she put it on, check the oxygen levels, verify the cooling loops, test the seals, confirm the communication links. And when everything checked out, when every indicator showed green and every system reported ready, she would trust it the way she trusted the ship. Because trust was not given blindly, it was earned through design, through testing, through experience. She leaned back slightly, her gaze moving across the console's displays. So many systems, so many layers of protection and redundancy. So much careful thought embodied in circuits and sensors and backups. It was humbling, in a way, to realize how much she depended on work she had not done, on people she would never meet, on decades of refinement and improvement and accumulated knowledge. But it was also reassuring. She was not alone in this. She stood on the shoulders of everyone who had come before, who had built these systems and tested them and proven them reliable. And when she went outside, she would carry that collective knowledge with her, not just in the suit's physical components, but in the design philosophy that had shaped them, the understanding that space required respect, not fear, preparation, not bravado, systems that could be trusted because they had been built to be trustworthy. She touched the screen lightly, dimming the displays. The diagnostics would continue running in the background, watching and checking and confirming, the ship taking care of itself so that she could focus on other things, on preparation, on practice, on the quiet work of becoming ready. The systems were ready. They had been ready since the journey began. Now she just needed to match them, to bring her own readiness to the same level of calm competence. And she would, through continued practice, through careful checking, through the patient accumulation of certainty that came from understanding and experience working together. She rose from the console, her thoughts settled and clear. The ship hummed around her. The systems worked, and she trusted them completely. After a while, she made her way through the corridors toward the equipment bay, where she could spend time with the suit again, learning its details, deepening her familiarity. Chapter 6. Stepping Closer. She had been standing near the airlock for some time, not at it exactly, just near it, close enough to see it clearly, to notice its details, to let its presence become familiar. Ari stood in the corridor, her arms at her sides, her gaze directed at the sealed hatch. It was larger than the other doors on the ship, more substantial. Heavy metal construction, reinforced seals, multiple locking mechanisms. Everything about it suggested importance, boundary, transition. This was the doorway between inside and outside, between the environment her body was made for and the one it was not, between air and vacuum, between pressure and its absence. But the door itself was not frightening. It was just a door, well designed, carefully engineered, waiting to be used. She took a step closer. The airlock had a small window at eye level. She moved near enough to see through it into the chamber beyond. Empty space, white walls, equipment racks mounted to the sides. A second hatch at the far end leading to the outside. 2 doors, 2 barriers. That was how airlocks worked. You sealed one before opening the other. You never exposed the ship's interior directly to vacuum. You created a buffer, a space that could transition between 2 states without compromising either. It was elegant, really. The way the design solved a fundamental problem: how to move between incompatible environments without danger. The answer was patience, gradual transition, 1 door at a time. She thought about the process, how it would feel to actually use the airlock, to step inside the chamber and seal the inner hatch behind her, to watch the pressure gauge drop as air was pumped back into the ship, to wait in the silence as the chamber emptied, to check her suit one final time before opening the outer hatch. The process would take time, several minutes at least. That was intentional. Time allowed for care, for verification, for making sure everything was as it should be before taking the step that could not be easily reversed. She appreciated that. The way the system built in pauses, moments where she would have to wait, to check, to confirm. No rushing, no shortcuts. Just careful, methodical progression through a well-established sequence. Her hand moved forward, not quite touching the hatch, but close to it. She could feel the slight coolness radiating from the metal. It was a boundary, but not an impermeable one. Just a door. One that opened and closed according to procedures designed to keep everyone safe. She had been on the ship for so long now that inside had become her entire world. The corridors, the compartments, the familiar spaces where she lived and worked and rested. It was easy to forget that this was not the only space. That beyond these walls existed something vast and different. But standing here, near the airlock, she remembered. Outside existed. It had always existed. She had simply been inside, looking out through windows, experiencing it at a distance. Soon, not today, but soon, that distance would close. She would pass through this doorway. She would experience outside, not as something observed, but as something entered, something present all around her, held at bay only by the suit she wore. The thought did not create fear. It created a kind of alertness, an awareness, a recognition that proximity was different from distance, that being near something was not the same as being inside it. She took another step closer. Her hand reached out and touched the hatch. The metal was cold and smooth beneath her palm. solid, real, a boundary that could be opened, but only when conditions were right, only when everything was prepared. She thought about the word threshold. This was a threshold, a place of transition, not just physically moving from inside to outside, but mentally moving from preparation to action, from anticipation to experience. But she was not crossing it yet, and that was fine. Standing at a threshold was its own valid state, a place where you could be close to something without being inside it, where you could acknowledge what was coming without rushing toward it. The ship held steady around her. The hatch remained sealed. Everything was stable, secure, unchanged. And she stood there, hand on the metal, breathing slowly, letting herself be near the boundary without needing to cross it immediately. Proximity did not require action. It just required presence, the willingness to be close to something, to acknowledge it, to let it become familiar before it became experience. She had always understood that. The value of gradual approach, of moving toward things in stages rather than all at once. It was not hesitation, it was patience, allowing readiness to accumulate naturally rather than forcing it. Her hand dropped from the hatch. She took a small step back. The airlock remained where it was, sealed and waiting. It would be there tomorrow and the next day, and whenever she decided the time was right. There was no hurry, no deadline, just the eventual certainty that one day she would step forward instead of back, would open the inner hatch instead of just touching it, would enter the chamber and begin the sequence that would take her outside. But not yet. Not today. Today was for standing near, for letting proximity become comfortable, for allowing the threshold to exist without needing to cross it. She looked at the hatch one more time, taking in its details. The heavy seals, the manual override handles, the small window showing the empty chamber beyond. All of it designed carefully, all of it ready. And she was almost ready too, not quite yet, but closer than she had been yesterday, closer than she would have been without the practice, without the preparation, without the patient work of understanding what she would be doing and why. She turned and made her way back through the corridor, her steps light and measured. The airlock remained behind her, quiet and patient, a threshold waiting for the moment when proximity would become passage. But that moment could wait. She had time. The ship had time. The universe outside had all the time there was, and she would cross that threshold when she was ready. Not before, not rushed, just when the readiness she had been building finally matched the reliability of the systems she would trust. After a while, she made her way toward the observation deck, where she could sit and watch the stars and let her thoughts settle into the quiet rhythm of the ship. Chapter 7. Outside Exists. She had been thinking about Earth, not with longing or nostalgia, just remembering, noticing the difference between what had been familiar and what was familiar now. Ari sat at the observation window, her hands resting in her lap. The stars filled the viewport, steady and constant. The same stars she had been watching for months, the same darkness between them. But she was thinking about air. On Earth, air had been everywhere, invisible and infinite. She had walked through it, breathed it, felt it move against her skin when the wind blew. She had never thought about where it came from or how it was maintained. It simply was a feature of the planet, something given freely, requiring no effort to access. Outside, beyond the ship's hull, beyond the viewport she looked through, there was no air, no atmosphere to breathe or feel or move through, just absence, vacuum, a place where matter was so sparse it might as well not exist. That was what outside meant here. Not a different place with different air, like stepping from a building into a street, but a place where the conditions for life did not exist naturally at all. She thought about how humans had learned to go there anyway, not by changing space, that was impossible, but by carrying Earth with them, by building small bubbles of atmosphere that could exist temporarily in places where atmosphere did not belong. Spacesuits were proof of concept, evidence that with enough understanding and care, humans could extend their presence into environments they had not evolved to inhabit. Not forever, not without support, but for hours at a time, long enough to work, to explore, to experience what existing outside felt like. She remembered her training. The instructors had talked about space not as an enemy, but as an environment, a place with its own characteristics and rules. Learning to exist there was not about conquering or overcoming. It was about understanding, about working with the conditions rather than against them. Outside was not hostile. It simply was a place of vacuum and extremes, temperature swinging from intense heat in sunlight to deep cold in shadow, radiation present at levels that required shielding, micrometeorites moving at speeds that could puncture unprotected surfaces. These were facts, conditions to account for through design and preparation, not threats to fear, but realities to respect. The suit handled all of it, provided pressure where none existed, regulated temperature despite the extremes, shielded against radiation, protected against impacts. It created a small environment where her body could function, surrounded by an environment where it could not. She thought about the first humans who had gone outside, how uncertain it must have been, how much trust it must have required to seal themselves into early suits and open those first hatches. They had not known for certain that the systems would work. They had theories, calculations, testing, but not experience, not proof. And yet they had gone, carefully, methodically, building confidence through small steps, each success creating knowledge that made the next attempt safer. Each person who went outside and returned added to the collective understanding of how it could be done. Now, decades later, going outside was routine, not easy. It still required care and preparation, but reliable, understood, something that happened regularly without incident or alarm. She appreciated that, the way human knowledge accumulated, the way uncertainty transformed into confidence through careful testing and shared experience. What had once been extraordinary had become, through patience and repetition, ordinary. Outside existed. It had always existed. And humans had learned slowly and carefully how to be there. She would be continuing that practice, not pioneering anything, not proving anything, just following procedures that had been established and refined, using equipment that had been tested and proven, doing something that hundreds of people had done before her. That was reassuring. She was not alone in this. The path had been made. The systems had been verified. All she needed to do was follow the established process with care and attention. Outside was not a void to be feared. It was simply different. A place governed by different rules, and humans had learned those rules, had learned how to exist there safely for as long as their portable environments allowed. She looked out at the stars. They existed outside. They had always been outside, burning in vacuum, surrounded by radiation and cold and the absence of air. They did not need protection. They were built for that environment. She was not, but she could visit, briefly, carefully, carrying everything she needed with her. The thought settled over her like a familiar blanket. Comfortable, known. She understood what outside was. She understood how humans went there. She understood the systems that made it possible. And when the time came, she would put on the suit, enter the airlock, and experience outside directly, not through a window, not at a distance, but present in it, surrounded by it, held safe within the small bubble of earth she carried. Outside existed, and she was almost ready to be there. After a time, she rose from the chair and made her way through the corridors toward her quarters, where she could rest before the next cycle began. Chapter 8. Ready is a feeling. She had been sitting in the equipment bay for some time, not doing anything in particular, not checking systems or practicing movements, just sitting, being present with what she had been preparing for. Ari sat on the bench near the suit's storage mount, her hands resting loosely in her lap. The suit hung before her, empty and patient. The same suit she had inspected, studied, touched. The same equipment she had learned to trust. But today felt different, not dramatically so, just subtly, a shift in the quality of her awareness. She thought about readiness, how it was not something you decided to have, but something you recognized when it arrived. Not a switch flipped, but a state gradually reached through accumulation, through preparation and practice and understanding, building quietly until one day you noticed you were ready. I'm ready. The thought surfaced simply, without fanfare or certainty beyond doubt, just a quiet recognition, an acknowledgement of something that had been growing for days, for weeks, and had finally reached completion. She let the thought settle, examined it gently. Was it true? Her body felt calm, no tension in her shoulders, no tightness in her chest. Her breath moved in and out at its normal pace, unhurried and steady. Her hands rested without restlessness. No need to fidget or move or do anything other than sit. That was part of it. Readiness felt like calm, like the absence of the need to prepare further. Not because preparation was impossible or unnecessary, but because it had already been done. The work was complete. What remained was simply action when the time came for action. She thought about what readiness was not. It was not excitement, though she felt a gentle curiosity about what going outside would be like. It was not confidence without question. She still had healthy respect for the environment she would enter. It was not impatience. She felt no urgency to act immediately. Readiness was quieter than those things, more settled. It was the feeling of being aligned, of having done the necessary work and arrived at a place where the next step felt natural rather than forced. She looked at the suit again, its familiar shape, the layers she understood, the systems she trusted. It was ready. It had been ready since before she left Earth. Designed, tested, proven through use. Now she matched it. Her readiness meeting the suit's readiness, two prepared systems, waiting for the moment when they would work together. She thought about the cycles she had spent preparing, reviewing the ship's systems, inspecting the suit, practicing movements, standing near the airlock, thinking about what outside meant and how humans had learned to be there. None of it had been wasted. Each piece had added to the whole. Each practice session had deepened her familiarity. Each moment of thinking had clarified her understanding. And now all of those pieces had accumulated into something complete. She was ready to go outside. Not today, necessarily. There was no schedule demanding it. No external pressure creating urgency, but soon, when the cycle felt right, when the moment aligned with the readiness she now recognized in herself, and that was fine. Readiness did not demand immediate action. It simply made action possible. It removed the barrier between intention and capability. It said, when you choose to do this, you can. She thought about fear, whether she felt it. She examined her internal state carefully, honestly. Was there fear hiding somewhere beneath the calm? She found caution, respect, attentiveness, but not fear. Fear would have created tension, urged her to avoid or delay or find reasons not to go. What she felt instead was acceptance, an acknowledgement that going outside involved real conditions that required real preparation. And she had prepared. The caution she felt was appropriate, healthy. It would keep her careful when she went outside. It would remind her to check and verify and move deliberately, but it did not prevent her from going. It simply shaped how she would go. She let her breath move in and out. The equipment bay was quiet around her. The suit hung on its mount. The ship hummed its constant background presence. Everything was ready. The systems, the equipment, the procedures, and now herself. Readiness was a feeling, not a thought or a decision, but a state recognized through presence, through sitting quietly and noticing what was there, through examining her internal landscape and finding that the preparation had reached its natural completion. She would go outside, eventually, soon, when the moment arrived that felt aligned with this readiness she now carried. And it would be fine, not because going outside was without challenge, or because space had somehow become safe in an absolute sense, but because she had done the work. She had learned what she needed to learn. She had practiced what needed practicing. She had built trust through understanding and experience. She was ready. The recognition settled over her like a gentle weight, grounding, real, not excitement or nervousness or doubt, just readiness, simple and complete. She looked at the suit one more time. Soon she would put it on, would seal herself inside, would carry its protection with her through the airlock and into the environment beyond. But not yet. Not this moment. This moment was for sitting, for recognizing, for acknowledging that the preparation was complete and the readiness had arrived, and that was enough. After a time, she rose from the bench and made her way through the corridors toward her quarters, where she could rest, carrying this new awareness with her, the quiet certainty that she was ready. Chapter 9. Everything already works. She had been lying on her sleeping pad for some time, not sleeping yet, just resting, letting her body settle, letting the day's thoughts fade into the background. Ari lay with her hands at her sides, the blanket pulled up to her shoulders. Light, familiar, the same blanket she had used since the journey began, soft against her skin, warm enough without being heavy. The ship hummed around her, the same hum it always made, constant, steady, the sound of systems working, air moving, energy flowing through circuits and conduits, everything functioning as it had been designed to function. She thought about that, how nothing had changed, how everything was already working, had been working all along. The air cycled through filters, breathable, clean. The temperature held steady, comfortable, neither too warm nor too cool. The pressure remained constant, invisible, supporting her body in ways she did not need to think about. All of it was already there, already functioning, already reliable. She had prepared to go outside, had learned about systems and suits and procedures, had practiced and inspected and stood near thresholds. And through all of that preparation, the ship had continued its quiet work, maintaining, supporting, providing everything she needed. Going outside would not change that. The ship would continue working while she was gone. The systems would keep cycling. The life support would keep maintaining the environment inside, ready for her return, and the suit, when she wore it, would do the same work the ship did, just in a smaller space, just around her body instead of through corridors and compartments. The same principles, the same reliability. Everything was already in place, already proven, already working. She did not need to make anything happen. She just needed to use what was already there, to step into systems that had been ready since before she began preparing, to trust what had already proven itself trustworthy. The thought was settling, reassuring. She was not creating safety. She was accepting it, receiving it from systems that offered it freely, designed and tested and refined to provide exactly this kind of support. Her breath moved in and out, slow, steady, the same breath she had been breathing since birth, the same process her body knew how to do without thought or effort. In, out. The ship breathed too in its way, air moving, systems cycling, everything flowing in patterns that required no intervention, no forcing, just presence, just function. She thought about the cycles ahead. Tomorrow she might check the suit again, might run through procedures one more time, might stand near the airlock and feel its proximity, or she might not. She might simply rest, might let the readiness she had recognized continue to settle, might allow the time between now and action to be whatever it needed to be. There was no urgency, no requirement that she move faster than felt natural. The ship would continue working, the suit would remain ready, the airlock would wait, patient and sealed. Everything was already in place. She let her eyes close. The darkness behind her eyelids was soft, familiar, the same darkness she had seen every time she closed her eyes to rest. Nothing had changed. Nothing needed to change. The ship hummed, the air moved, her breath continued its gentle rhythm. Everything already worked, had been working, would continue working, and she was held by all of it, supported, carried forward through space by systems that asked nothing of her except that she exist within them, that she trust them to do what they were built to do. She trusted them completely, without reservation, and that trust required nothing from her now except rest, except presence, except the willingness to let the systems work while she simply was. Her body felt heavy in the gentle way that came before sleep, not weighted down, but settled, at rest. The preparation was complete. The readiness was recognized. The systems were working. Everything was already as it needed to be, and she could simply rest. After a time she did not measure, sleep found her, gentle and natural, while the ship continued its patient work around her. Chapter 10. Held. Her quarters were dark, just the faint glow near the doorway, soft, distant. Ari lay on her sleeping pad, the blanket light over her shoulders, warm, her body settled, her breath slow. The ship hummed, quiet. She did not need to listen. It was there, her eyes closed, the darkness gentle. She noticed her breath, in, out. She did not count, just felt. The blanket soft, the pillow cool, everything still. The ship carried her. She did not feel it. The stars glowed somewhere. The suit waited, ready, and she rested. Her thoughts had quieted, drifted, the hum, the warmth, the air, in, out. Her breath continued, steady. She let go of preparation, let it rest. Nothing needed doing, nothing to solve, just this, just breathing. The darkness soft, her body sinking, settling. The ship hummed, her breath moved, in, out. Everything still. The systems worked, quietly, patiently. The suit ready, the airlock sealed, the air cycling, and she was held. The blanket, the ship, the air, the gravity, all there, in, out. Her body heavy, soft. Time passed, or did not. The ship carried her, the universe carried her, and she let herself be carried. Her breath slowed, in, out. The hum continued, quiet. The darkness gentle, everything still. She was still. The preparation complete, the readiness recognized, the systems working, and she rested, her breath in, out, soft, slow, still. The ship hummed, the darkness held her. Everything continued, quietly, patiently, suit waiting, ship holding, air cycling, preparation resting, ready, held, enough.